Okay. In lesson 14, we just got an overview of lesson 14 a bit last week. And in this study, I want to be aware now we're introducing a different tense. The only tense that we have used so far is the present tense. Now, the present tense and Greek tenses don't have time in them except in the indicative mood. And time is incidental, it's not the major factor in it. But the present tense in the indicative mood is action that is continuous or durative or linear. That is, it continually goes on. It may be what's called iterative, which means it's repeated. So they repeatedly assembled, or they partook of the Lord's Supper regularly, or they assembled on a regular basis. So that could be iterative. You repeat it from time to time. Pray without ceasing is probably iterative. Make it a habit to pray or practice to pray regularly, regular basis. And so that would be probably iterative. So that's your present tense. But it's in the indicative mood, it's continuous, linear, durative, or habitual action going on at the present time. Now, we have the imperfect tense now, a new tense. It's still in the indicative mood. So the indicative is just a statement of fact. It's going to be the active voice. The subject is doing the action of the verb. So the imperfect, we want to explain it here. Autos, gar, agnosken, t, ein, in, to, anthropo. For himself, he himself knew what was being. There's the perfect tense. Okay. In the man. So in man in general. Okay. So for himself, John 2:25. So here it is. And he was knowing this. Right? So he was knowing, there it is also right there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to come in and look at what the imperfect tense is really saying. And tense has that time element in the indicative. None of your other moods have time element in them in the tense itself. It's all from the context. Tense is, the time is. Since the imperfect occurs only in the indicative mood, it doesn't occur in the other moods. Now, why wouldn't it occur in other moods? Well, because present tense occurs in the other moods, and it's the same kind of action. So the difference between the present and the imperfect is they both have the same kind of action, but the present is in the indicative mood is the present in present time, whereas the imperfect is in past time. So when you get to a mood that doesn't have time in it, that would be all the other moods other than the indicative, then they won't need two tenses, that not need both of them because they'll both be doing the same thing. That makes sense? Any question there?
Not 100%.
Because they have the same kind of action, and the only difference in them, in effect, is that the imperfect is just like the present tense, but it's in past time. Now, in the indicative mood, you can have time in it. But in your other moods, like subjunctive or imperative mood, and we have another mood called optative mood, which is a wish. There's only about 70 or 80 of those in the whole Testament. But what we have in those moods, those other moods, they don't have time in them. So they would, if you had a subjunctive that was present tense, and they do have present subjunctive, and you had a subjunctive that was imperfect tense, they'd be doing exactly the same thing because they don't have time. They'd just be covering the same ground. Is that a little better?
A little better.
So that's basically why we don't have the imperfect in any tense except the indicative mood, any mood except the indicative mood. Right? Now, so when we have it, the imperfect occurs only in the indicative for that reason. It always indicates time of the action because it's never in any mood except indicative. So it's always past time. So it is, remember, the main emphasis of verb is still the kind of action. And so the imperfect represents action as linear or continuous. You might add the word durative as duration. In this case, the imperfect is linear, continuous in the past. Present tense would be linear, continuous in the present time. Present from the standpoint of the speaker, of course. The imperfect then is the progressive past tense. And so you could say, I was leaving, right? You remember when in Luke, I think it's the 18th chapter, where the blind man was at Jericho. He was sitting and he was crying out, and the people were telling him to stop crying and to be quiet. And he was crying out. This is in the imperfect tense. He kept on crying out, continued it, even though they were telling him to stop. So it was continuous action. He kept doing it. And so we can see the thrust of the word. It didn't just do it once, he continued doing this thing. Right? So we see it in a number of instances where the thrust indicates that it was a habitual practice that was going on, linear, continuous thing. So it should be translated was or were, and leaving the simple English to what we call the aorist tense, which we'll cover a little bit later, okay? Sometimes it's translated used to, and it'll give a sense. It may be customary, iterative, that's repeated at intervals. We've talked about that. Connotative, that's an attempted or inceptive beginning, inception of something, the beginning of it. And it has some other usage in the context, okay? Any question? The imperfect tense then is formed, made from the stem of the first principal part of the verb, the present tense. So it's made off the present tense stem. The imperfect, added on, I was loosing. This is first person. There's your stem, loo. And it has the new here. So come down and look at it. It has the new as the ending. And the rule is it has a connecting vowel that's either omega or epsilon, or an omega verb. So the rule is that we go down just a little bit further, variable that is the connecting vowel. This is our connecting vowel here, highlighted, is omicron before an ending beginning with a moo or a nu. And it's an epsilon before any other ending. Let's look at our endings here. We have a nu here for this ending. So the rule is it's to be an omicron for connecting vowel because it's a moo or nu. We have an omicron. That's what we have right here. We have our stem. We have the omicron connecting vowel and the nu, and that tells me that it is first person. We got this epsilon to begin. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So that's your stem. There's your stem of luo, lu, off the omega, put on in it, and that will make it first person. We do have this, what we call the augment. We'll do that in a minute. The augment tells me it's past time or past tense, and past in time. Now, using this rule here, we have a sigma, which won't be a nu or a mu or nu. So we would have an epsilon as connecting value. That would be elu ace. So I want to do it here. It would be ace. So I'll just write. Right. That would be in English. The elu ace. Okay. Right now, I'll have it down here below. Show it just. So it has the endings of the second range, which is in the active are, these are your endings. Now notice we have a min, and before that we'd have an omicron. So it'd be Omen your ending. That's the same ending as present tense. And we don't have a mu or a nu here, so we'd have an ete. That's the same as present tense. Okay. Now we have a nu here or a san. Two possibilities. Now, it says no ending at all here, the third person singular. So we still have an epsilon, right? And we'd have put an epsilon here. Now we'll go down and look at it in just a minute, all right? In addition, we have the augment. This is something new. That augment is a warning. Let me change this to like that. That augment is a warning that we have something in the past time, right? In addition, it received in the perfect an extra syllable called an augment. It's thought to be an old temporal adverb, then. That's what it's thought to be. Where the stem begins with a consonant, the augment is epsilon and is added directly. And this is called a syllabic augment. The stem begins with a vowel, the augment contracts with the vowel. It's called the temporal augment contract. See that right here. Our stem begins with a consonant, so it'll just be an epsilon. Your augment epsilon. Begins with a consonant, say lu. Come to epsilon. Right? Those are your rules for it. That's, we're going to have augments in the aorist tense too as well. And he puts the imperfect in, not because it's so common, because the aorist tense is more common than the imperfect. But he puts it in probably because it's so much like the present tense. That is the kind of action is. So they're probably he's put them together to contrast the two, for us to see them side by side. Present is durative, continuous, linear action, habitual action going on at the present time, whereas the imperfect is linear, durative, habitual, continuous action going on in the past. Same kind of action. Question. Right. Now, here's your endings. Here's the rules for it. Okay. You have an augment. So right here, there's your stem, lu. Ending on it, a nu, with an omicron connecting vowel. Then the augment is just the epsilon at the beginning of the word. Right in front of the stem. We have eluon, eluase, elue, eluon, eluete, eluete, eluon. Now, I want you to see something here that could be a little bit of a problem. Eluon, eluon. Third person plural and first person singular are the same spelling and same form. So it's a contextual problem. I lose, I do lose, I was losing, I was losing. Luo is I loose. This is I was loosing. You were loosing. He, she, or it was loosing. Luoman, we were losing. Luete, you were losing. Luon, again. They were losing, or it could be back to I am losing. That's a contextual question. Context will take care of it, though. Could be a problem in some passage. Good question.
Yeah, one question, not particularly about that, but maybe I missed it on the plural, third person plural. It can be on or san.
Yeah, that's what's a different. We got our stem different here. A different stem connecting vowel. Okay. So there's some irregular words. Right.
Okay, so san is for some irregular verbs. Okay.
Right there. You're talking about. I think that's what you're talking about right there.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Now, he notice here, first person singular and third person plural are alike. But it's a context. Usually the context takes care of it. I haven't run into any place context didn't take care of it. Okay. So you run into contextual questions. We have contextual questions in our English all the time. We usually solve them. We can solve them by basically the same rules, except we need to remember our rules for the Bible are we start with the premise that it's infallible and inerrant. Okay. Not looking for any errors or any mistakes in it. And the writers didn't make a mistake. Whatever he put there, he intended to put. That's two things I would start with interpreting the Bible. Questions? All right, the temporal augment, verbs beginning with a vowel take temporal augments. All right, we've already had the two kinds of augments up here. First one is the temporal, and he talks about them, epsilon, and then the stem begins with a vowel. It's an initial vowel, it's called a temporal augment, a syllabic augment. Come to those two right there. Those are two ones. The temporal will take it first. First, begin with the vowel, take temporal augments. Notice the general rules. Epsilon plus an alpha becomes an eta. So if we start off with an alpha, the word starts with alpha, and it becomes an eta. If it's an epsilon plus an epsilon, epsilon is a short e and eta is a long e, or an a sound. And so what we get then is these two together, two shorts make a long, make an eta. Now, echo is one that is a little different. That's one exception. It becomes icon. These two become a diphthong. Diphthong, of course, is long compared to a vowel. Okay. So I is longer than epsilon. Right? See those. I think that try some. In the wrong form. Right, that's better. Okay, I'm reformatting as I go, fellas. I'm sorry. And I'll save it. All right. Iota, omicron, or upsilon lengthen become an iota, omega, or an upsilon. Right. So they'll lengthen. Omicron short O and omega's long O. Okay. So usually two epsilons, the augment being an epsilon, the word begins will become an eta. That will be your augment eta. Right? Epsilon plus an alpha be an eta. So we would take agape, agapao, take that word, have any diacritical markings, sorry. It's one of our words. Put it in. And so it begins, that's an omega verb. So if we put an epsilon plus an alpha, if we try to put an epsilon here, it becomes an eta. So this will become an eta. So we eta, okay. And then if we wanted to change it to, let's change it here to, now we got an uh-oh ending here, so that's another rule that comes to bear. But we could put just no ending at all. Let's make we could put ete ending or one of these here on the ending, case ending. Let's just put ending. It's an uh-oh verb. That's the, sorry, I messed. That's how you would take the augment, like that. You have to change this ending over here because it's got these two vowels. I'll mess it up.
So what would it be in the first person singular?
Well, we would, let me go back.
It'd be agapan.
Yeah. And we would put an on here. And so I think that's what it would be. Got an alpha and omega here. Might be another letter here, but I think that's it. That would be first person singular. Okay. Okay. All right. I shouldn't have chosen that word. Okay. Echo is a different word. It has an exception. There's an exception on echo. All right. All right. Any questions?
Yeah, when it says they lengthen, it looks like Omicron is the only one that really changes. The others, iota and upsilon, just stay the same.
Yeah. They may turn it into a diphthong and add something to it. And we see it down here, diphthong combined first vowel, and the iota remains a subscript. So what they do is that iota might become a subscript. Like here, this right here, diphthong would become eta with a iota subscript. Alpha iota become an eta with an iota subscript. It could just remain as epsilon iota, a diphthong. Those are diphthongs. A lot of times we won't end a word with just a iota. Be like a diphthong right here or here. Most of the time, your iota would not stand by itself there.
So A can turn into eta or remain A. How does the Bible generally do that?
Well, it pretty well follows these rules here. I mean, they're pretty consistent all the way through. Like here, epsilon, that's a diphthong. Comes either mains, epsilon, epsilon, become an eta, epsilon, eta. I depend on if there's words, vowels, or vowels before. So it could be either form right there.
Yeah, that's strange because with A, eta's pronounced the same way. But if I were to do U with eta upsilon, I would pronounce it AU.
Yeah.
Instead of U.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, let's take our present tense. And right here, here's some examples that maybe will help us. I'll go. a lead, and the alpha becomes an eta, and what you have is a gamma stem, and then you have leave og as your stem, comes egg and on. That's first person. I was leading. I row, that's a diphthong. So the rule, it becomes eta with an iota subscript. Okay. That's where that iota went to. Basically, your alpha become an eta, and the iota over here then become a subscript. You still have the on ending. First person. Akuo, there's a diphthong, o, here, and the alpha becomes beta. Then you got the ku, and on. So the omega drops off, becomes on. It's so first person. A gyro, the epsilon, on, get off over there, becomes an eta. Epsilon becomes an eta. Gyro. So this is your stem. So what we have the on ending, first person. And Eurisco, that's a diphthong. And here in this case, it becomes an eta. Eurisco. Okay. You and hair. And I have trouble pronouncing that. Viscon. That's your ending. That's your diphthong. Echo has this different ending. It kind of goes against the rule. Probably came out of another dialect somewhere. That's icon. I was having. Hello, I wish. And it gets an eta. She fell on. It's an old stem. Here's the old stem right here, but it became an eta later for some reason. Mellow becomes a mellow. Now, let's go back to our rules here. The epsilon lengthens to an eta plus an eta. And epsilon. Now, let me see. Your connecting valves, omicron, epsilon. Along. So that's your augment over there. It's from mellow. That's your augment and along. And the on ending is first person. Or third person, or first person single, third person. Right. Those are some examples of them. And when the Bible uses the imperfect tense, the scholars that I've read tell us that it's definitely meant for you to make the distinctions, because the normal past tense is what we call the aorist. And Greek loves the aorist language. It uses the aorist tense over and over and over. But when it uses the imperfect tense, he's trying to stress the durative nature of it, something going on in a linear or durative or active fashion. Right. Get to it a little bit later with the other tenses. The augment in compound verbs is a little different now. Get this augment. We have a compound verb now. Right here's a compound. Which is a preposition. Right. Lambano. or a mono. So the augment goes right here. So the alpha then here becomes an epsilon. Kick out of it here. That alpha right here becomes an epsilon. So that's where your augment goes. It goes after the preposition. Right here, this is kata. The alpha got dropped off. Kata. So it drops. So to have an augment before epsilon makes it theta. Cell is I eat. Kata cell is I eat it down. And it's translated I eat it up. I eat it up. I consumed it. It's here in the perfect tense. I was consuming, eating it up. Eating it down is how they'd say it. We would say he ate it up. That's the one. Questions. This is very helpful now. Keep in mind when you run into the perfect tense, you're going to run into instances where it really takes the meaning and gives you a better, clearer picture of it. The imperfect tense is like a motion picture. It's viewing it like a motion picture. Whereas the aorist tense, which we'll get to later, is like a snapshot. That's your difference. Okay? So the augment goes right there. Okay? There's your augment. After the preposition, the alpha got dropped off here. Kata. Kata and SL. Right there. The kata, put an alpha right there. SL. Kata cell. So that would be our word. All right. Now, and so the omega drops off, becomes. Right? Any questions? Imperfect is not near as common as the present tense. Don't have near as many of them, but there, it's pretty rich in meaning and something that's very important. Remember, we have the me verbs like we had in the last lesson, and the following of the forms of the three most important me frequent forms in brackets are not found in the New Testament. Didomi, histomy, tithemy are your three main me verbs. Of course, you do have a me, being verb, ame. It did deduce, it did. This is in the New Testament. These two are not. It did domen. It did ot. And then it is son. There's where the son comes in with that word. Right? Or it could be un. Okay. It could be un. Very an ending. Histome, histamen, histasto, that doesn't occur in the histate, and that occurs histamatha, and histasethe. Now these are not in the active voice. These are different voices. Right here is the active voice. These are passive or middle. Okay. Histato. tanto. Right? Tiffany, etithane, tithase, tithay, tithayment, tithasate, tithason, tithason. I almost get my tongue tangled up saying it. Okay. Any comments? In the present stem, where it has its present reduplication, in this case, the augment right here becomes this right here. Dido. So we have this form, augment to epsilon. Perfect endings are added directly onto without a connection with the vowel here. This me verb in this word here, there's no connecting vowel. Right? So we have an un and back up to our forms. Got our pattern up here. Here your form sigma, nothing, intase, and new or song. Right? That's how you get your form. Now, let's see. Let's look at our vocabulary, and we've got just a few minutes to get through the vocabulary. Amen, that's not really a Greek word. And it's an adverb. It's derived from the Hebrew language. Came over and began to be used. But it means most assuredly or truly or verily or certainly. Usually it would be translated verily, sometimes truly. There's another word that's also translated truly. It's also translated amen. So the words verily and amen are actually the same word. It's translated all these different ways. Echo, this is apo and echo. Apo, echo, evolve. So your augment is going to go right here. Rough breathing, hamar, tolos, tolos. That's the center. Now, here's kind of important point to make here. This is someone who's given over to sin. You're not a sinner necessarily because you sin one time and then repent. You've been guilty of sin, and sin will cause you to be lost. But a sinner is one who's devoted to sin or given over to. So Christians there's only one time a Christian is ever referred to as a sinner. Paul's talking about himself being the chief of sinners. But he's looking back, and he's probably just looking back at what he was before he obeyed the gospel. Nowhere else is a Christian ever called a sinner. So the claim that we're all sinners is just, I believe, false. Yeah. We may sin and be lost, but a sinner is someone who's given over to it. Now, if we let ourselves sin and not repent, not come back, and give ourselves over to it, we'll become a sinner. So I think there's a difference. This is one who makes it a practice. He is devoted to it. That's what the scholars will tell us this word means. Ek bino, again, that's verb. Ek and bino, I go bino, and ek, I go out, or I come out. But I think it would normally be I go out. It's in the active voice, okay? Eartros. That's a physician. is kuros, strong. All right, here's the compound. Cardestao. Cardestao is I eat. Cardestao is down. I eat it down. We would write that as I eat it up. That's how it's actually Thayer defines it that way. The Greek is actually saying I eat down. Okay. Now we have another idiom or way that the words are, the thoughts are expressed. We have kai, which means and. One of the very common words in this says we'll find sometimes. And kai, and then some text, and then kai again. So kai with text and kai is both and is how we normally would translate it, both this and that. And Pauline is an adverb, and so it's telling again, do this again. And then there's para and ago. So that would be ago. And then alpha gets dropped off. We have just parago. Right? So that's I pass beside. Here's another. As soon as that, I notice makes it a capital sigma here. And right down here's cot SL. Ata SL and soon as this is I'd eat with. And probably we would find that we're not to eat with certain people. Corinthians chapter 5. Chapter 6, probably. Corinthians chapter 5 for sure. Telonion. And this, of course, is teloniu, teleon, place of told. There's your verb. Our article. Place of told, tax collector. Freya. That's a need. It's usually with the verb echo, I have need, or he has need, or you have need. I need something. I remember my memory hook for this is after I was young, the Korean War was going. I remember hearing about it, and I thought about the Koreans, they have need of being helped. So we were helping them. Any questions? All right. Let's go back and see if we pick anything else up. All right. Break it at the preposition and our problem. What the comes at epsilon. It's alpha big epsilon. And that's your augment. Epsilon is your augment. That's where it is. Right. And here, got SL. So the break, kata, SL. There, and SL. The alpha becomes beta, SL. And so it's your augment. I don't know. Maybe I'm beating this horse to death. Any questions? Away from it. Probably should have gotten you some more information. The file that I sent to you, Greek lexicon and grammar notes, get into it and read more about the imperfect tense. But it's pretty rich meaning, and there's passages where it really comes to bear and it becomes important. Okay. Any questions? Right? Now we've been working on text A and text to translate from English to Greek down here. Let's do that for next week. Is that right, everybody?
Sounds good.
Number 3.
Questions? Right. One instance where Jesus was preaching or teaching, it's imperfect tense. He was teaching and was continually teaching repetitive action. Several times when it has him teaching or preaching, it's repetitive. It's imperfect tense. Imperfect tense is not the general rule for past tense. Now, I want you to, one other thing I did not point out, I don't think I did. Sorry, I failed to point it out, I think. Do you see an infinitive there?
No.
There is no infinitive. Why wouldn't they have an infinitive? Because
Because of the time.
it doesn't have time. So the present tense infinitive will do the same thing as a sense. So there's no need of an infinitive with it. You don't have one. There's no imperative mood because the imperative mood does not have time in it. So present imperative would do the same thing that an imperfect imperative would do if we had one. Any different? No subjunctive mood either, same reason. We're going to come over here to some other ones that don't have infinitives either, so we'll see that later. All right. Now, when we get through with this, it'll probably take us all. It's this right here. Into the imperfect, indicative, middle passive. Like the present tense, when we do get to it, the middle passive has the same form as the middle and passive have the same form. Context. Textual question. Question? To get to that lesson 50. Right. I'll try to have you some examples of perfect next time. A couple of examples. It's found a number of times. It's found there sufficiently. If you have my notes on 1 Corinthians and Romans, you can just type in the Control H search IMPERF, and you can probably find it enough times. See how it's used. That would be helpful if you have those. You have both those files, both of you do, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now I'm constantly updating.
I did, yeah.
And so if you'll ask me if you need them later, if you want to use them, I've already done a bunch of updating on both files. Okay. I won't just keep sending them to you. I'll if you're wanting to do some work on them, that's the latest iteration of it. Right? Okay. We do this and get us out.